com. I'm going to wait 1 second here until we have a few more people in the chat because I imagine there's just a few of us that are joining right now because obviously we are jumping into a live and early. So, Zach, Dan, fellas, it's a pleasure to have you here. We got a lot to talk about after a somewhat disappointing performance by the Edmonton Oilers last night. Obviously down 1-0 to the Winnipeg Jets. A lot of people are calling it a game stolen by Connor Hellebuyck. You know, when you're the underdog team, you come on the road and you win the first game in a series, that's always a good sign for you. And Zach, I'll start with you. The Oilers, you know, what's the mood? What's the vibe around the team from your angle this morning?
It's calm, cool, collected. I mean, last night in the post-game press conferences, we got to hear from Darnell Nurse, Connor McDavid, Jesse Puljujarvi, James Neal, and Dave Tippett. And all of them didn't seem to be too hung up on the fact that they lost game one here. Obviously, you know, you want to win any game you can, especially in the playoffs here. But you know what? The Oilers played a hell of a game last night, right? Like, Connor Hellebuyck really stole the show. You know, you guys know me. I'm a big underlying analytics guy here. Connor Hellebuyck had saved 2 goals over expected last night, so he really stood on his head for Winnipeg. You know, I think there's a lot of things that the Oilers did right and a lot of things they can take out of it into game 2 on Friday here. You know, they want to get traffic to the net. They have to get at Hellebuck's crease. That's my girlfriend in the other room sneezing. And you know, I think if they are able to do that, they're going to be able to generate some offense. You know, you look at Jesse Puljujarvi last night; he scored a goal, you know, simply off of a big rebound that Hellebuyck wasn't able to control. So, you know, I think there's a lot of good things that remained in the Oilers game last night.
Dan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think for me, you know, it's a team, or it's a game where the better team on paper didn't win the game, and that's okay. You're okay with being the better team on a given night, and the bounces just don't go your way. You know, we don't have that I don't want to say fluky tip, because I mean it was a skilled tip, but you don't have that tip that goes into the net and then they call it a goal a minute later. And this is an entirely different conversation that we're having right now. So it's you know, yeah, it's a little bit of you can understand for Oiler fans seeing how we performed against Chicago last year, where there could be a little bit of fear creeping in. But for me, yeah, I just feel like, you know, you're going to lose games. You don't go 16-0 in a playoff run. It just doesn't happen. And so, yeah, I'm okay with the loss here. You know, they need to win on Friday, and then the conversation shifts to Winnipeg. So,
Dan, you touched on it briefly. You know, from a fan standpoint, I don't want to be the pessimist on the chat right now, but part of me almost felt like last night's game felt very similar to the play-in round last year against Chicago. You know, it was a slow starting game. All of a sudden, it seemed like the Oilers weren't that engaged physically. You know, he's the best player in the world, and you don't want to necessarily criticize his game, but Connor McDavid essentially seemed somewhat invisible throughout the first 2 periods. Or of course he had his flashes at moments, but you know, we weren't really seeing that full out game changing, game taking over Connor McDavid that we've seen in the past. So Zach, did you find any similarities between last night's game and some of the playing games against Chicago last year, and does that worry you at all?
I mean, not really. I think it was a bit of a different game. You know, I think last year in the play-in round, you saw Chicago take over games, and I don't think Winnipeg ever really did that here. You know, both of their goals weren't world beater goals. They were a little bit more of a fluke, right? Obviously, the 4-1 score isn't really indicative of the game, given that there was 2 empty netters. You know, I think again, like I said, the Oilers did a lot of things right last night. Like, you know, I think if they come out and play, if they come out and play that way every game for the rest of the series, I think they're going to come out on top here. Obviously, there's some adjustments to be made, but I mean, I understand that sentiment of that little bit of panic that starts to creep in after a game 1 loss. But you know, this is a really good, really deep Oilers team, and one of the best that we've seen here in this city for a very long time.
Dan?
yeah, it's you said it, Josh. It's, you know, you just like, there's always gonna be that pessimism that does creep in, and that thought of, oh god, here we go again, you know, Corey Crawford kind of effort. But Zach's right. The Winnipeg Jets certainly didn't destroy us yesterday, outside of, again, that deflection and you know, a poorly timed call of the goalie that I feel like that play is a very like, we're confident, and we're eager to get Mike Smith out of the net and get the extra attacker on the ice. And I don't know where Chason thought the puck was going, but he got a weird bounce off the glass, and it didn't go our way. So you move on. Again, and the difference between this series and the Chicago series is 5 games versus 7. That's just the plain and simple fact. You can lose 3 games in a series and still win the series. Whereas with Chicago, it was, no time after 1 loss. So, yeah, you get it. I understand it. Oiler fans, we can be guarded against this stuff. But as Zach said, this is the best team this city has seen since 2006. And we can't forget that fact. Bandwagon fans are going to drop off now. And the true diehards are here ready to go for game 2.
It's State of the Nation. We're going to be doing this after every Oilers playoff game day, 10 o'clock live across all of our channels. I'm monitoring the Facebook chat right now. If you have any thoughts on last night's game or any similarities you saw between the game against Winnipeg last night and the play-in series against Chicago last year, shoot them off in Facebook. We'll read some of them off. And Dan, I'll start with you on this one. We talked a little bit about, the difference and what a difference maker Connor Hellebuyck can be. He's a former Vezina Trophy goaltending winner. We see him taking over games similar to what we saw last night. So, if you're the Oilers, you dominated Connor Hellebuyck throughout the entire regular season. And then last night in the playoff game, when it really matters, all of a sudden he kind of shut you down. How do you flip the switch if you're the Oilers? Like, how do you not give him the opportunity to be the difference maker in a game like that, what it was last night?
Yeah, I think the team was guilty of, yes, we got a lot of shots on the net, but there wasn't I guess I can't even say that it wasn't a high quality chances. I just think you keep doing what you're doing. You keep shooting the puck, you keep attacking the net, and and you're not going to hold Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl off the score sheet for that long. The reality is this team does lose games when Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl don't pitch in. And that's, we saw it yesterday. The bottom 6 did better than our bottom 6. And so, that's going to happen in this playoff run. This isn't the first game we're going to lose because we don't get the production from the top guys that we want. But I don't think that this team has shown that its ability to be resilient in back-to-back games is there. They don't lose a lot of games in a row. And so, they come out in game 2, firing that puck. You get a quick one against Hellebuyck, and it's right back to, him doubting himself instead of us doubting him and our ability to beat him.
Zach, is there a simple solution to solving Connor Hellebuyck in game 2?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that the Oilers can do in game 2 is apply pressure early. I mean, we saw the lethargic first period that it was last night. Both teams looked like it had been 4 or 5, 6 days since they played, in any hockey game, let alone a couple of weeks since there was anything meaningful on the line for either of these clubs. I think the Oilers came out and they were a little too tentative early. They got to get pucks on Hellebuyck. I mean, I think that's the way you beat him. You got to get pucks on him. You gotta create traffic and create some chaos, and try and slip an early one past him and take a hit to his confidence. The pessimistic sort of sit back and wait defensive shell game the Oilers tried to play isn't really indicative of what this Oilers team can do. So if I'm Dave Tippett, I would be taking the reins off of that a little bit, especially early on in the game, and kind of let the boys fly a little bit.
If you're comparing this series to some of the other series we've seen start already down south, I wouldn't necessarily call this one, that physical. I know it's only been 1 game in, but, you look at comparing it to the Florida-Tampa series, that has been crazy physical. You even look at the Colorado-St. Louis series, which is arguably the least physical of all the ones down south happening. And all of a sudden last night, that ramped up as well. And Dan, I'll start with you. Do you expect the physicality to raise? Do you expect this to get to more of a playoff caliber game? Because although, last night the vibe was a little bit different, I don't necessarily know if it felt like a playoff game. because we've seen it in some of those games down south. I don't know which one you guys have watched, but even in the Caps Bruins series, you can feel, I know fans being in the building can make a big difference playing into that, but do you expect the physicality to ramp up? We saw it at the end of the first period. Pionk and McDavid got into it, and then of course the Jets Twitter account had a little bit of fun with a picture from that saying that they live rent-free in McDavid's head, which was kind of ridiculous. But Dan, I'll start with you. Do you expect the physicality to raise at all in this series?
Yeah, I do. I think that the Oilers are going to have to respond a little bit in game 2. I think that the sorry, my phones are just blowing up right now. Even though we saw hit numbers which were unbelievable, 118 total recorded hits, the Jets with 68 and us with 50. And the coaches afterwards, I think Zach can speak to that more, but they didn't agree with that necessarily. But yeah, for me, the Colorado St. Louis series has been pretty spicy. On hockeyfights.com, that's the only fight we have so far this playoff round. And as you mentioned, Kadri, went and found a head there yesterday, so he's got his in-person hearing. But yeah, I was very eager when I saw the scrum at the end of the first period to think that was kind of a wake-up call. And then Archibald's hit on DeMello there was unbelievable, and that did, you could sense that the team kind of lit a fire there afterwards, and they came out with a couple of good shifts after that, and so you hope that the team recognizes that a nice clean big hit can do a lot for a team that's having trouble beating the goalie. So yeah, I mean, it's and also you've seen the marking on Yamamoto, not just the physical marking underneath his eye, but the bumps and the grinds. Logan Stanley, who's at least 3 feet taller than Yamamoto, and he comes in and rubs him off a couple times. The Oilers have to do that to their skill guys as well. If the refs are going to let that happen, you can see the baseline that they've created now, and you got to play within it. So yeah, I think the physicality will grow a little bit more. But again, and speaking to what you said, Tyler, or to Josh, is these teams have seen each other a lot, and so they're pretty darn tired of each other, I think, at this point. And so I think that physicality will just rise to the surface. I think a lot of players just didn't want to make mistakes last night going for that big hit.
Zach, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the numbers were indicative of the hit totals. It didn't really feel to be that physical of a game, and it definitely felt like there was that feeling out process. Look for a guy like Zach Kassian to ramp that up in game 2. Obviously, for him, it was the first game he played in about a month, coming off that leg injury. So, I think that's the type of game the Oilers have to play. And McDavid noted that last night too, saying that, if the Jets want to play physical, we can play physical too. Well, I would much rather see the Oilers come out and engage physically and be that team that is forcing Winnipeg to have to respond to them instead of the other way around. If the Oilers want to go anywhere in these playoffs, they have to learn how to be assertive in their game. That's something that we didn't really see last night, and something that we did see for better parts of the regular season. The Oilers had the ability to really turn it on when they wanted to, and play different styles of games. But through the regular season, we never really saw the Oilers be the most physically engaging team. The most physical games they really had were against Montreal, and a lot of that was in response to what Montreal was doing, because Montreal plays a hard physical style of game, right? So, if I'm the Oilers, I think that's something that they can definitely bring to the table early on in game 1 and really set the tempo for what should be a really exciting game.
2 more quick thoughts on last night's game, and then we'll move on to game 2. Zach, I'll start with you on this one. Coombsy made a good point last night on the Oilers Boys intermission extravaganza when we were talking during the first intermission. With that slow start to the game, did it almost not not feel like both teams just didn't want to get scored on first? That's kind of the feeling I had in the first period. It was almost like a bit of a hesitation, and Coombsy said it exactly like that. It just felt like neither team wanted to be the first one scored on. And I feel like that was part of the hesitation that we saw throughout the game. And if you're the Edmonton Oilers, Zach, is that not exactly the type of game that you don't want to play? Because this is a team highly offensively skilled, and they just like to get out and start running, gunning, and run the transition game.
Yeah, I mean, the Oilers were one of the highest scoring teams in the NHL this year. So for them, the defensive mistakes are going to happen. They're going to allow goals against because they do play that running gun style of game. So I don't know why they decided to be tentative on that after a regular season that saw them doing exactly the opposite all the way. But I think, Kuma's right. Like, there was that feeling out process. There was, these two teams that kind of sat there and said, okay, we have to feel each other out all over again. Because we've heard so much talk about, oh, well, the Oilers went 7-2 against the Jets in the regular season. Like, they absolutely dominated them, right? So you could almost see that there was that hesitation of like, oh yeah, well, we know this is going to be a different season now, and we have to kind of start to feel this team out and see what they actually are bringing and what they're doing and that sort of a thing. So it definitely didn't feel like playoff hockey, though. You look at any of those other series that are going on down in the States right now with fans in the building, that adds a lot of energy, and I can tell that's something that's definitely missing from Rogers Place.
Yeah, I agree. Dan, did you kind of feel the same vibe too, that it was just kind of a bit of hesitation from both teams in the first period?
Yeah, and I think you get that too, especially where Winnipeg hasn't played since, middle of the week last week. The Oilers haven't played since Saturday, and they laid a stinker against the Canucks as well. So, I mean, you understand that, that those teams that are in the playoffs right now, they've had that intensity right from the get, just because they went from regular season to playoffs for me. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right when you say that, there was a little bit of trepidation and a little bit of fear there instilled in the thought that, you don't want to be the team that gives up that first goal. And then even when the Oilers did get the first goal, it just felt like it was like, okay, this is time to clamp down, and that's not the case with this team. It shouldn't be the case with this team. This team can keep going and needs to keep going and needs to put the foot on the throat and just absolutely stomp away. And they didn't do that last night. They let the Winnipeg Jets back into it, and then a bad bounce afterwards gets them down 2-1, and the rest was history. So yeah, on to game 2. Here we go.
We don't want to be completely negative about last night's game, so why don't we touch on one thing positive? One player that we thought, not necessarily stepped up, because I don't know if anyone really stepped up because it was a 4-1 loss for the Oilers, but just one player that you thought was engaged physically, engaged on not necessarily the score sheet, but one guy that just had a decent game. Dan, I'll start with you. One player you were impressed with from last night.
For me, it was Josh Archibald for sure. He was definitely a guy that I believe was going to be an energy getter for us in this playoff run. So he was exactly as advertised. And then I guess really just him. I wouldn't mind seeing a couple changes on the back end. But yeah, for me it was Josh Archibald, and that's it.
Zach, other than Josh Archibald, were there any players that impressed you last night?
Jesse Puljujarvi is built for playoff hockey. Yep. I mean, he scored his first playoff goal, scored the Oilers' first playoff goal this year. He looks like he is built absolutely to play in these style of games. He's able to use that big body, create space, win puck battles. Just all of the things that we've grown to love even more about Puljujarvi this year here. So, he really stepped it up last night, and I thought he looked really, really good last night.
Yeah, JP was the one guy I was going to go to too. Obviously, it's kind of a bias because he was the only Oiler that scored a goal last night, but it just seemed like JP was engaged physically. He was engaged in the transition game. He seemed like he almost was one of the drivers on that top line, which you need him to be. You need him to be engaged if he's going to play with Connor McDavid on a night in, night out basis. So yeah, JP was the one guy I looked at. We could talk about Mike Smith's performance. He kind of held up his end of the bargain for what you can expect out of Mike Smith. He had a great season. I would say that he did his job in last night's game. It just came down to the Oilers just didn't have the run support for him. So on that note, talking about run support, let's quickly touch on two changes, or not necessarily two changes, but any changes to the lineup you would make coming in for game 2. Zach, I'll start with you. Are you looking at anyone in the bottom 6 to move around? And you can talk about changing the lines if you want, or maybe even drawing a different player in, whether it's, there's Tyler Ennis, Devin Shore. There's a couple guys, Gaetan Haas, that aren't in the lineup right now that could get a look in game 2. Zach, if you're the GM/coach, what are you doing?
I think Ennis would be the only guy I'd bring in, and I don't really even have anybody in particular that I'd pull out of the lineup. I think this mix of players, and I know there's people in the Twitch chat that are disagreeing with that sentiment, but I think, this is a good mix. I think this is a good group. I think every line has sort of the chemistry that you're looking for in a line. I really don't know if I change much. I mean, I'd maybe pull out Slater Cuckoo in favor of Caleb Jones. But in the same breath, Slater Cuckoo and Ethan Bear controlled 80% of the expected goal share when they were on the ice last night. So it's hard to argue with the numbers when you see a pairing like that be successful in a game one, albeit small sample size. But, that was a good turnaround, especially for a guy like Bear. I think he's been struggling a little bit as of late, and his numbers have too, playing with Caleb Jones. But I really like Jones and his ability to move the puck off the back end there, and I'm not sure if that's something that is as strong of a point for Slater Cuckoo. Beyond that, honestly, I don't know. I think you just got to roll with what you got because, again, like the Oilers really played a good game last night.
That's one thing that I noticed last night too, is I thought that third pairing of Cuckoo and Bear actually played well. I'm not a big underlying numbers guy, but I looked at some of the numbers, and the Cuckoo Bear pair, they had great numbers. It was that second pair of Larson and Kulikov. They struggled last night, and you could see you didn't need the numbers to show that those two struggled last night. And it was just Larson and Kulikov. They just seemed to get caught in some bad situations. I agree with you, Zach, in bringing in Tyler Ennis. I think he could add some skill to that bottom six wherever you slot him in. Brent Smith says in the Facebook chat, I'm just looking at it here, where'd it go? He wants to swap Cahoon and Cass. So if he was the coach, he would take Zach Kassian, put him on the top line. He said McDavid needs some protection up on that first line. Dan, I'll go to you. Any lineup changes you would make, and would you think about swapping anyone in those top two lines?
Yeah, for me, I think I'm along the same lines as Zach and you, Josh, in saying that I think that there's a defensive switch to be made. I would take out Kulikov, I think, for Jones myself. I was surprised at how good Cuckoo looked in there. I thought if anybody was going to have a rough game, it was going to be him, having had only one game towards the end of the regular season to be able to get back into form. So yeah, impressed with him. The top six, I don't know. I don't think we get away. We don't need to hit the blender just yet for me in the top six. I know that as you mentioned in the Facebook chat, Dangle Dump was suggesting that we flip Cahoon for Archibald. I just don't think you need to hit that panic button just yet. This team is good. This team does score well with those two lines in there, and then we've seen it at the end of each of the periods. They do go to the Draisaitl McDavid on the ice with either Yamamoto or Puljujarvi kind of combination, just to try and get something going. And I do feel like at least to my eye test that did work out. So I think you stick with what you got up front, if not sliding in an NS for I don't know, a James Neal. But other than that, I'm pretty happy up front. I would just like to see Kulikov come out, get Caleb Jones in there, and then just go ahead and kill it in game two.
Bit of a missed opportunity for the Edmonton Oilers in game one. No Nick Ehlers, no Pierre-Luc Dubois, playing at home. Now I don't want to say must win, fellas. I don't want to put the must win tag on game two, but especially if neither of those players are playing come here Friday night. That's a game you got to win if you're the Edmonton Oilers. Zach, do you expect the Oilers to wrap up this edition of State of the Nation? Do you expect them to respond on Friday?
Yeah, I do. I expect a big response Friday. I expect the team to come out and play a really strong game. I expect them to come out and win. Anything short of that would be a real disappointment. So I think this is an Oilers team that's built for this style, or built for the playoff hockey. I think it's a team that can come out on top in this series, and that hasn't really wavered in my thoughts yet.
Dan, do you expect a bounce back game from the Oilers?
Absolutely. This is just a blip on the radar, and we're not gonna be thinking about this much more after a couple more games. They'll come out. I think they're gonna score a couple early and really set the tone for a good, powerful team like Zach said, the better team of the two, and we're gonna see that come Friday night, and we're heading to Winnipeg tied 1-1, and that's just fine by me.
That is it. 1-0 right now for the Winnipeg Jets in favor of the Edmonton Oilers in the opening round series in the North. The Jets versus Oilers. That was game one last night. Game two is going to go Friday night here in Edmonton once again. We will wait and see if any lineup changes come from Dave Tippett. Fellas, it was an absolute pleasure. Make sure to tune in every day post-game day. So every day after a playoff game, tune in, State of the Nation. We're going to run it every day, 10 o'clock following a game day, breaking down the game, giving you our thoughts, and hopefully, fellas, on Saturday, it's a little bit more positive. It was a pleasure. This